All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to or welcome back to the Ask an Agroforester webinar series. We appreciate you being here. My name is Emilie Tweardy, and I'm an agroforester for Appalachian Sustainable Development. Stesh, you want to introduce yourself real briefly?
Hi, everyone. Stesha Warren here. I'm also an agroforester for Appalachian Sustainable Development, working tech support in the backside.
And Jonathan, if you want to say a quick hello, we'll get to hear lots more about and from him soon.
Hey, y'all. Jonathan, calling from the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. And we'll talk more about that later.
Yeah. All right. I am going to share my screen here and do some intro and tell y'all where we're headed for the evening. Everybody see that? Can I get a thumbs up from Jonathan? He's the only one I can see. Okay, awesome. All right. Here we are again, Ask an Agroforester. This is session 5 of 7. So we've got 2 more left after this. We've got another one this Thursday and next Tuesday. But tonight we are going to have a really fun session called Wildly Homegrown with our main man here, Jonathan McRay. But first, all right, a little bit about ASD. We are living better locally. We've been around for 25 years now, and I think the agroforestry team's been around since 2010. Our mission is to build a thriving regional food and agriculture system that creates healthy communities, respects the planet, and cultivates profitable opportunities for Appalachians. So I just want to direct y'all to some agroforestry specific resources this evening. So if you go to the ASD webpage, and you do the little programs drop down, you can click into the agroforestry page. We've got a ton of resources there, so it's worth a click whether or not any of the programs we mentioned tonight seem useful to you. And then we've also got the Appalachian Harvest Herb Hub, which is the 3rd one down in this screen. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a minute, but that's where you would find that webpage. A couple of programs I would like to direct your attention to. One is our Agroforestry Technical Assistance Program. You can go online and fill out a free application for free assistance. We have assistance in forest farming, alley cropping, and silvopasture. That might be anything from just sharing resources with you if you're like a real new beginner, or a phone call or a video meeting. And in some cases, we can even come out for a site visit to advise you in person on your land. So if this stuff's interesting to you, definitely apply for assistance today, and we'll see what we can do. The Maple Woodlot Assessment is one of our newer programs. This is for folks in Appalachia who have a woodlot or looking to do maple syrup and wondering where to get started. So you can check out that program as well if that applies to you. We are also a part of the Edwards Mother Earth Foundation grant that we were calling Train the Trainer. We've got some rebranding on that, which you'll see in just a second, but save the dates. The online course is launching at the end of May. And we've got in-person workshops coming up for forest farming, alley cropping, and silvopasture. But this is now called Trainings for Natural Resources Professionals. So this is not geared towards farmers. This is geared towards folks who are in a training capacity and want deeper knowledge. So NRCS, Department of Forestry, outreach, any of those types of folks, this definitely applies to you if you would like some deeper learning. So definitely check it out. We also have a Catalyzing Agroforestry grant program that we are a part of. This grant has funding for silvopasture and forest farming producers to, it's basically like a cost share program to get your sites going. It can help kind of relieve some of that burden, some of those barriers to entry. So check that out if you're interested in installing either of those, but you're feeling a little overwhelmed by the financial burden. Full disclosure, right now, the funds for that are depleted, but we very much anticipate getting another disbursement of funds sometime, maybe towards the fall or end of the year. So we do still have open applications on a rolling basis, so check that out. And then lastly, the Appalachian Harvest Herb Hub. This is a space for folks basically in 3-hour radius of Duffield, Virginia, to come. They can use shared use facilities to process their herbs. We can help you access larger markets. We can help aggregate orders of multiple herb growers so that they can access larger markets. We do trainings, all kinds of great stuff. So check out the Herb Hub if you are a small herb grower and looking to scale up, or just looking to find out what that might look like and you're close to the Herb Hub. Look up Robin Suggs. His information is here and he would love to chat with you. All right, that's all from me for now. We're gonna head into our webinar, Wildly Homegrown, Sourcing, Selection, and Storytelling with Jonathan McRay. But don't forget, we've got Eliza Greenman coming up this Thursday doing a live agroforestry consult with a hog producer. So that's going to be really cool. And then a week from tonight, we've got Getting Started in Coppice Agroforestry with Mark Krachek. Let me take a moment to introduce y'all to our wonderful guest. So I met Jonathan a couple of years ago, and by a couple, I think it was like 6 or 7 years ago, I think at Farfields Farm. I believe that's where it was, which is a farm out on the edge of the Blue Ridge in outside of Stanton, we'll say in between Stanton and Charlottesville. And I was really impressed with Jonathan immediately. And then we didn't come back into each other's orbits for probably 4 years or so. But Jonathan is just an incredibly smart guy and an incredibly humble guy. And we had, I think the first time we met, we had a great conversation about, I think it was Project Gemeinschaft, a project outside of Stanton that's working to reduce recidivism for recent male inmates and has all kinds of support services. And so my introduction to him was within the realm of social justice. And I feel like now he's doing this work that's very acutely like on this edge, this really like productive edge space between social justice and activism and nursery work and agroforestry and environmental work. And so he's just such a great guy and generous with his time and his knowledge. So let me take a second and give you guys the full bio because I do have it here. All right. Jonathan McRay grew up in a small town in East Tennessee and has a deep affection for Central Appalachia and its dark green forests, hills, and hillbillies. I love that. He played in the woods a lot, stirred by stories of tree shepherds and forest outlaws. Jonathan worked overseas in Israel, Palestine, and Mozambique before returning home to take responsibility for his life and history. He's worked on diversified farms, studied conflict transformation and restorative justice, and was a founding member, mediator, and market gardener for Vine and Fig, an urban farm education center and supportive home. He regularly teaches classes and workshops on cultural ecology and restorative justice and works with grassroots groups and organizations to shape conflict as renewable energy and make decisions collectively. He loves the culture of land care and healthy community and supports that love with experience and education in agroecology and agroforestry, ecological design, soil health, plant propagation, and watershed restoration. He also likes well-placed puns and humanure jokes, and he's trying to give up perfectionism in favor of joyful growth. So it's such a nice bio. And I've got just like a little blurb about Silver Run Forest Farm, which he's going to talk about in depth in just a minute. So I'll share that with you really quickly. With Cornelius Deppe, he caretakes Silver Run Forest Farm, a riparian nursery and folk school rooted in love and living soil, sprouting out as agroforestry, watershed health, and restorative justice, all to propagate cultivars of liberating power to feed the earth and grow beautiful gift-giving cultures like trees so we can have enough and be fully ourselves. The nursery grows beautiful and useful plants that cross-pollinate, food sovereignty, and ecological restoration, hybridizing gardening and gathering, farming, and foraging. So you can also see he likes to write. He's got a way with words. And so I know that was a little long, but I like to share it because I think it's really beautiful and tells you about the thoughtful kind of guy that he is. So Jonathan, I'm going to hand it over to you. You can go ahead and share your screen and tell us about yourself, please.
Oh, I don't know how to start after that. Thanks, Emily. Really appreciate that. Really fun to be virtually with y'all and chat about trees. I love talking about trees and all the things that trees are doing and how we can partner with them and imitate them in the work that we're doing. We think a lot at the forest farm. My forest farm partner Cornelius and I talk a lot about how economically and agriculturally. We're trying to figure out how to imitate the multifunctionality of trees that are just by being themselves are doing so many amazing things at once. They're not multitasking, they're being multifunctional, just being the beings that they are. They're going to have all these gifts. And like, what if we tried that? What if we did that? So that's a big piece of what we're doing. I'm going to share my screen.
Yep.
Let's see. Make sure this is working.
Yep, gotcha.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, I'll talk at you for like 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll keep it as conversational as possible. Would love for this to be kind of roundtable back and forth sort of thing. But we're Silver Run Forest Farm. I mentioned Cornelius, my spouse, Kristen, and we have a little one. We live here on this 2-acre park. Cornelius is here all the time, working together. So we're kind of a collective of a couple of us who are tending this work. For almost 6 years now, we've been doing this specific expression or this specific iteration of this land tending and kind of cultural care. But Silver Run Forest Farm, we talk about ourselves as a riparian nursery and a folk school rooted in love and living soil. We've got these 3 emphases of agroforestry, watershed health, and restorative justice. I won't go into tons of detail about all that right now. On our website, we have kind of a drop down with a drop down tab with descriptions of each of those things if you're interested to see more of that kind of stuff. But we're rooted in love and living soil here in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, in the Ridge and Valley subsection of the Great Appalachian Valley. Ancient land that used to be under a sea, that has been home for at least 15, maybe 20,000 years to indigenous people speaking Siouan and Algonquin and Iroquoian languages. So we're stepping into a place that has had long partnership with humans, and so we're figuring out what our relationship is to this place in a way that honors that and repairs some of the toxicity that's been deeply polluted into this soil and leached the fertility from it, both culturally and ecologically. I won't go into details about this, but we're really working in a tradition of the global peasant movement, or at least drawing inspiration from that, from La Via Campesina. It's the largest social movement in the world that represents farmers and fisher folk and pastoralist agrarian resistors around the world. Of maybe 250 to 500,000 people are involved in this movement in some way, and it's kind of influenced how we speak about ourselves as cross-pollinating food sovereignty, which is a term that comes out of the peasant movement, and ecological restoration, because we're pretty convinced we don't have to choose between feeding humans and feeding the earth. We think we can do both, and agroforestry is a pretty powerful way to put a little bit of roots to that vision. And some of the main ways we do this is through our nursery, where we're propagating thousands and thousands of plants every year. One of the main, we have the website, we do sales to the website. And we're also really focused on imitating the trees. Like I said, the multifunctionality, and trees are amazing givers. They're redistributing or giving away a quarter to half of the photosynthetic energy that they produce every year. So we kind of figure we need to imitate that a little bit. And we're not as generous as the trees yet, but we redistribute 10% financially of what we make every year into kind of seed bank options for loans, for debt relief, for bail funds, for supporting projects that are doing beautiful restoration and regenerative work, especially with indigenous land rematriation efforts. And we also give away most of the trees that we grow in partnership with the Northeast Farmers of Color Network and other indigenous nations that we have trusting relationships with. And we call that our CSA, but instead of a community solidarity, or instead of a community supported agriculture, we call it a community solidarity agroforestry. And we're figuring out how to grow that into really the main thing of what we're doing. But the folk school is a part of it, of just teaching ourselves to be who we need to be for this time of the world, through land and craft skills, but also through movement organizing, through conflict. Along with farming, I'm also a mediator and support folks in conflict transformation and different organizations, and trying to bring those things together in a really integrated way. We consult with groups as well, and we have different visions. I won't go into detail on a lot of that now, but Thinking about nut crops, oil and flower crops. We do a lot of chestnut and acorn flower and hazelnut oil and bitternut hickory oil. We're thinking about how to have community nutteries, sort of based on Mediterranean municipal olive oil presses, and looking at nursery alliances that are connecting these hubs across the eastern woodlands, what we call the East Coast, and also thinking about land trusts and housing co-ops, protected, preserved access to land, and to housing, to shelter, and to subsistence, so that people have their basic needs met through the work that we're trying to scheme up here. So our nursery, this kind of stuff I want to talk to you about propagating and how we source things, and we'll get into a lot of details with some of the plants themselves, especially in conversation together. But we're growing a lot of beautiful and useful plants and trees that give us food and medicine, mulch, fertility. They're converting carbon, they're restoring water, that are, like I said, are cross-pollinating food sovereignty and ecological restoration. And one of our main efforts is to try to speak and farm in ways that honor the plants as fellow creatures, as beings with histories and with gifts, and also to respect the human cultures that care for them, to be really specific and detailed in our storytelling about where the plants came from, not just where we sourced the plant, the specific one of on this neighborhood or this farm is where it came from, but the longer history of the generations of people, especially on this continent, indigenous people who have partnered with these plants to bring them into the forms and the shapes and the habits that we're familiar with now, that often just get assigned to something that happened kind of wild, as if like wasn't touched by humans, but almost always it's a partnership with other humans. And our nursery's kind of growing us up too. We're learning how to be hopefully better humans that way. But we do all bare root plants, propagated from seed, from cutting, from divisions, from dividing the crowns of plants, from layering, where we're kind of taking plants and tipping them over into healthy soil that we make from compost and wood chips and biochar. At this point, we source everything we grow. We gather all the seed. We take all the cuttings ourselves through stuff that we have access to within a driving distance, and most of it's very local to where we are. In our nursery, we call ourselves a riparian nursery, partly because we're growing a lot of plants that support the health of waterways, but we're also growing in the waterway. We're growing along the banks of two different streams, mostly out in a rural spot now, but we started in Harrisonburg, next to downtown along Black's Run in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And we grow in really deep mulched in-ground beds that look like big garden beds. We have stuff planted out, and I'm looking out the window and I can see part of the nursery. Forest gardens and riparian buffers that all serve as orchards and woodlots and seed stock. So we have like really intensive beds, but kind of once you learn propagation and how to save seed, how to take cuttings, how to partner with the plants, everything's a nursery. It really changes how you can experience the landscape. And so we're planting things out on this very small 2-acre site that we have the deed to here in Kieseltown outside of Harrisonburg. We're planting things out so we can forage basically here. We can just walk around saving tons of seed. And 2 acres is a very arbitrary, private property boundary. There are tons of other places that we source from and gather from that we go visit. But how can we also make this sort of a seed bank or an arboretum of amazing varieties that we're experimenting with? And Emilie said this in the opening, but kind of hybridizing gardening and gathering and foraging and farming, which I think is an older definition of agroforestry. There's a lot of definitions going around with a lot of different merit and different reasons for why they go, but we think of agroforestry as tending trees for food and medicine. And that if we're going to put a label to it, it's one of the oldest ways that humans have partnered to grow food and medicine with the land, is working with trees and fields or cultivating under the canopy of woodlands. And it's a way to kind of bring gardening and gathering into a relationship where it's hard to tell the difference between horticulture and agriculture and forestry. So here, I've got a few pictures here of just some of the plants we grow. We grow a pretty wide range of different things, and some things we focus on more in bulk, and then some things we do a little bit of as we get to know the plant. And some of these pictures in the top left, you can see Cornelius in a fig grove on a university campus. Those are Chicago hardy figs. We grow 4 different varieties of figs right now from cuttings. So at the end of the season, we take long cuttings of them and stick them way down in deeply mulched beds. And even in our climate where it gets pretty cold, they do well with mulch, and then they grow 6 to 7 feet in a season here from the cutting themselves, which is pretty amazing. kind of going around the top, you can see elderberries, that gorgeous white flower, Kentucky coffee tree on the far right, and down to mulberries that I have out in my hand that we've gathered on a farm. That was a beautiful tree that looked like it was cracked by lightning and has amazing, diverse, like abundant fruit and tastes really, really good. Mulberries can be so variable, but these taste delicious. And all the seedlings will be pretty varied. That's kind of how sexual reproduction works, is you're messing around with some stuff. So we know that there's going to be variation, but part of that diversity is probably what we're excited about, and seeing what comes from that, and knowing that it will still be beautiful rootstock and fodder for animals and coppiced firewood and that kind of thing. And you can see plums on the branch leaning across. The red fruit is Cornelian cherry, which is a edible dogwood, really popular in Eastern Europe. Cornelius spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe working in the Balkans, where Cornelian cherries were really highly respected and used for different liquors, different liqueurs and vinegars and stuff like that. And we have a lot of people come to us who can't find Cornelian cherries many other places. And there are often people whose parents or grandparents came to this country from Eastern Europe or from Turkey or Iran, who talked about, my father told us about his grandfather had a Cornelian cherry in the yard, and we found it finally, and it's so exciting to see this. So those are the kind of stories that people offer back to us, sort of in exchange for the plants that just feel like such a gift. And in the middle there, you can see false indigo, or river locust, as we like to call them. One of our favorite plants, native nitrogen fixer. It's such a brilliant agroforestry crop that we cut for mulch and let them resprout in so many different ways. I won't necessarily walk through and point out all these plants. These are some we could come back to in the questions and conversations. And Emilie or Stesha, if you're willing to give me like a 5-minute warnings, just to be sure I'm moving at a good pace.
Sure, I think we're right around the 5-minute.
Great. So we are sourcing often from backyards and farms and universities and places where we just got to know plants. People told us about stuff, what we've looked for, and then we've revisited to see about what's disease resistance like, what's taste, what's the vigor, the growing habit. Some things we know, are cultivars that we're cloning by doing cuttings and stuff like that we're really preserving or dividing. Those Jerusalem artichokes in the bottom right, you see there, we grow a couple different varieties, including one called Stampede, because that is what they do through the soil. And those were originally propagated by indigenous breeders on a reservation in Northern Ontario for having tubers and flowers that produce far earlier to adapt to the low growing light day hours and really northern cold climates. So they just power through in places like this. So we're cloning those basically by just dividing these tubers, the switchgrass on the top left that we take divisions from. We grow hazelnuts on the top right from seed, pawpaws, aronia or black chokeberry, persimmon, acorn, spicebush, chestnuts that we found just across the street from us are 2 very old Chinese chestnuts that are maybe 100 years old, if not older, that our neighbors have talked about harvesting for a really long time. And as you can see in the picture, like really sizable nuts, delicious flour. We make a ton of flour with them. Vigorous, very hardy trees that we're producing. Most of the seed chestnuts that we grow are from these trees that we just fortunately happened to move across the street from. We knew the trees before we moved here, and it just ended up working out really well with these dear neighbors, and so many others that we're growing, where we're just noticing the abundance that's around us. We like to source in, there's people who have partnered with plants and have brought them to such a place that we put names to them and have, cultivar names. And that's such a gift, but we also see such potential in working with the beings that are already here and noticing how they're growing, what their habits are, and what potential they have, and how easy it can be to grow many, many plants in a small space once we learn some of these kind of partnership cues with the plants to grow so many out. And so that's kind of become our focus of offering these bare root trees. This is when we dig everything up in the spring and the fall, we ship everything bare root, and sawdust from a friend's workshop, and brewer's bags that we get from a brewery in town that hosts everything, holds them all for us. Cornelius used to dumpster dive for them all, and one of the owners came out of the brewery one day and saw them in there and he said, well, keep them for you if you don't want to be in the dumpster. So we get them all that way now, hundreds and hundreds of them to ship them around. And briefly before I open it back up for questions, and we can then turn back into some of these plants and the details of them for anybody who's interested in specific sourcing of them. But one of the main questions we get a lot from people is how to protect plants during really cold spells. If you aren't ready to plant them yet, and you don't have a lot of pots, like what do you do with a bunch of trees that show up on your doorstep or ones that you grew? And something we've learned from many other nursery folks who have been so generous with their knowledge, including Sean Dombrowski, who was on this not too long ago, shared a lot with us, is heeling in, like the heel of your foot, is to find a shady area that'll be a little cooler and dig a deep hole or a wide trench and lay the roots down. You can see the root, I'm holding in that picture, 2-year-old honey locust from seed. You can see the size of them. It's just amazing what they're doing. Lay them in that hole or trench so that the roots are down under the kind of frost line of the soil, way down in there, and then cover that with wood chips, really kind of macerated leaves or compost of some kind, and then tamp it in with your foot, heel them in so you push out the air pockets. We overwinter hundreds and hundreds of trees by heeling them into holes like the one in this picture, or like wood chips, big piles of wood chips that we have here that we get dumped by Arvis that you can see on the left. There's bundles of curly willow. I see flavoramia, which is a red twig dogwood that's been bred to be yellow. There's hazelnuts in there. And then the picture on the right, I'm holding a bundle of 2-year-old spice bush. That smell, oh my goodness, all the time when you pull them out is unbelievable. And then there's chestnuts and hazelnuts and other things, hundreds of them, 3-year-old chestnuts that are 8 feet tall, 7, 8 feet tall, that we have healed into the wood chips as a way to very easily and very quickly store trees for a pretty considerable amount of time, and keeping them moist and from freezing. So it's a really easy, efficient way to do that. I'm going to pause there with talking to you and see what questions Emilie has and others, but really appreciate you all making room and time to hear me share some of this stuff.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Let me get back to, so you can stop your screen share if you want.
Okay. Yeah.
There you go. All right. So we will get into the Q&A in a minute, but first I do want to just have a little follow-up prompt for you. Since your nursery is so unique in its approach, and especially since we labeled this section seed selection, sourcing, storytelling, I'd like to just give you a minute to tell us a little bit about sort of how y'all arrived at kind of the ethics set that defines Silver Run, and in particular why the emphasis on storytelling, because even just listening to you describe your place, and like it's obvious that you're really like 100% in it. You're, smelling the smells, and you're really there and present. So yeah, if you want to just talk to us a little bit about kind of those ethics, and then the storytelling piece and the narratives that are so important for you guys.
I love that. It's hard not to be present when you're smelling spice bush just fresh out of the ground. So yeah. It's amazing. Brings you right into the moment. Yeah, a lot of different directions, I think, are kind of our ethical or grounded approach. And I think out of the work that both Cornelius and I have done in many other settings, I think, as an organizer and a mediator, and I do a lot of teaching and facilitating with people, and just needing to tell better stories and truer stories about our history, but the history in this country, the history of how we came to this place, that needs to apply to our plants as well, because they all have histories. They're living beings. If we're going to respect them as living creatures, then they have stories too, and they might tell them in different ways, or the people who partnered with them might tell them in different ways. And I think I also think better storytelling, or fuller, richer storytelling, is just more interesting. You just get more details. And so there's a lot of ecological or ag approaches that kind of sort of dilute everything. Like it becomes a melting pot of just like, well, it's regenerative agriculture. It's this kind of practice. Like, well, what specifically, like, where did this plant come from? Why is it so regenerative? Who partnered with it to make it that way? And what were their traditions and practices? What were their myths about this plant? What were all the uses and understandings of fig and plum, and Kentucky coffee tree. Kentucky coffee tree is a native nitrogen fixer that you have to scarify. You have to like abrade or like cut the seed in order for it to sprout. And that usually happens through weatherization, through like freeze and thaw cycles, just out in the world. But when humans partner with it, it happens in interesting ways. And indigenous nations like Cherokee and Choctaw and what we call now Tennessee, Kentucky, some of these areas use the coffee tree seeds for ceremonial purposes and for recreational dice games, and carved intricate patterns onto the seeds, which scarified them. And so then when camps would move on, groves of coffee tree would come up afterwards, which becomes a way to kind of mark settlement sites. And that's true of so many plants.
Really cool.
Yeah. So a lot of stuff like that I just find exciting. And there's an indigenous writer named Robin Wall Kimmerer who wrote a book called Braiding Sweetgrass. She's a PhD botanist and an indigenous plant woman, and she wrote in this book, I've just put this link in the chat, there's a article excerpt from the book on Yes Magazine called The Honorable Harvest, and she outlines these principles that she sort of collects from many indigenous understandings of how to partner with landscape well, and like respecting the bodies of who you're taking from the land, and how to offer gifts. So without like, kind of taking from traditions that aren't ours in a way that doesn't have a reciprocity, it's like, how can we be inspired by this? Also find in our heritage things that are very similar, that there's old traditions that we can learn from as well. So I think it comes from a lot of different sources, but also just getting excited about the plant stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. So we're going to do our quickfire round of fun questions before we get into our nitty-gritty questions. Nice. So we'll start with the same question we started with for everybody. What's your favorite farm tool?
Oh, man. I love a bill hook. I do love a bill hook, like an old English version of a machete for coppicing, cutting trees down to resprout. But I use my Felco pruners all the time, so I do love those.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a least favorite? Anything you've got a love-hate relationship with?
Tractors.
Yeah.
They're useful. They're very useful, but I use a broad fork a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you had a favorite aha moment this spring? I know you've had a really busy spring.
Oh my gosh. An aha moment. There are probably a number that haven't fully metabolized into my consciousness, but I think one is I think there are some plants that we would really like to be growing to focus on more and like grow at a bigger scale. We grow thousands of plants, but what are some that we could grow in really large quantities to partner with restoration efforts and rematriation efforts? And we still grow a diversity of things, but is there a role for a sort of niche specialization in some of what we do that still has a really powerful gift for diversity? So I'm just to like reduce some of the strain in different parts of the season, it might simplify some things.
Yeah. That the ever present, simplifying versus diversifying
right.
question. Yeah. You're a new dad. What's the best parenting advice you've gotten so far?
There's been a lot of beautiful ones, but one in particular is from a friend who said, when you and your partner inevitably argue in front of your child, even from the youngest age, let your child know what's happening, that it's like, hey, we're having a hard argument, we're feeling kind of frustrated with each other right now, but this isn't about you. We both really love you and we're excited to be with you, but we're just working this out. And that's been awesome, both because I think it does completely shift his emotional orientation in the moment, but also for us to kind of take that pause, take a deep breath and figure it out has been really helpful.
Oh, that's great. And completely unrelated to anything, what is the last song that was stuck in your head?
every now and then I get songs from Bo Burnham's Inside, which is a
yeah,
Netflix special that gets stuck in my head quite a bit. That's How the World Works, or Welcome to the Internet.
that's awesome. That's great. All right, on to the agroforestry. So this is where I get to sort of be the voice of the people and ask the questions that folks have sent in ahead of time. So first question is a land access question. Any tips on getting access to state-owned land? Very neglected forest area in my suburban neighborhood that I would like to get turned around and tended.
Great question. I don't have a really good answer for that. We struggled with that for both city and state land. But there are awesome partnerships. One that just came to mind was a group, I don't know how much they're functioning now, but called Louisville Grows, and Louisville, not Louisville, Louisville, Kentucky.
Louisville. Mm-hmm.
Louisville, it's like down in here, Louisville, yep. Kentucky. Louisville Grows, they partnered with a city-owned lot and turned it into an urban farm, and also had leased out to like an anarchist collective for like a mutual aid garden. They had spots like greenhouses for people to use. So that was a really unique partnership between a nonprofit organization and a city lease that was protected. It's hard to, if you want to like turn around state-owned land, but I would talk to a local forester, like find the people that kind of get excited about that sort of thing and just start. It may not be everybody or the person who can make the decision the first, but find somebody who in the system who would resonate and just keep working on that.
Yeah, start making friends.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Take them some chestnut flower.
Uh-huh. All right. Okay, management questions. So we already talked about storing plants. Can you talk a little bit about your propagation of woody perennials versus herbaceous, and do you do any production of annuals? It's a big question. So.
Yes, I can talk about that. And then yes, we grow annuals. We don't grow a lot of we don't offer annuals to the nursery, so it's all perennial stuff, but we grow a lot of annuals for our gardens here. So we're starting those from seed in the ground or in trays, and love that stuff. Love partnering with annual crops. And then there was woody perennials versus herbaceous stuff. Was that the question?
Yep.
Yeah. So they're broad categories, and there's so much variation within those. But I think we grow a lot of woody perennials from seed. We do like hazelnuts and chestnuts, and we do acorns, grow oaks from seed, hickories, butternuts. That's a lot of seed grown stuff, because again, it's kind of oversimplifying, but a lot of those don't do as well from cuttings. Depending on how you're defining some of this, elderberries or willows, those are so easy from cuttings and amazing. So those we do all from cuttings, or currants, gooseberries, we do cuttings and stick in nursery beds. Herbaceous stuff like comfrey, we do comfrey roots, or bee balm, native bee balm, we do from divisions, like big clumps of them. We just kind of stick a shovel in and pull out a few little divisions of them. Rhubarb, we do from seed and division. It really depends. And are we trying to preserve a variety through cloning, which is what a cutting is, or division? Or are we trying to kind of breed something new and unique and see what happens, which is what we would be doing often from seed. Some stuff grows more true to type than others. It's more like the parents, and some is so variable. But I wouldn't say there's like, here's how we do all of our woody perennials and here's how we do all our herbaceous stuff. It's very mixed. But a lot of a general practice for us would be most of our woody perennials we do in beds, because we're doing seeds or cuttings. So we want to do them very densely so we get thousands of them. Unless we're doing cuttings, and then we're just taking them off trees or shrubs that we have, and we offer cuttings to people. And then herbaceous stuff is usually growing out in the land, like out in forest gardens or riparian buffers, that we can just go to the massive row of Jerusalem artichokes that took over and dig out tubers, or do that with comfrey roots from a few patches. So that's kind of the main difference, is like intensive beds versus extensive forest gardens.
Let me insert a follow-up question in here. So we talked with Sean Dombrowski a couple weeks ago, or I don't know what is time anymore anyway.
No idea.
Recently, we talked with Sean recently, and he really focused on the air pruned boxes. Are y'all doing more boxes or beds or both?
Both. Yeah, I didn't cover that because I thought Sean might have shared that, but yeah, we do a lot of air pruned beds, specifically for taprooted trees. And some of you may not have been on that video, but if you get a chance, the link's on the YouTube channel to check that out. And they're beds that have hardware cloth across the whole bottom of the bed is made with like woven wire hardware cloth. We use a really small gauge, like 1/4 of an inch, to keep soil from falling through. And so rodents can't squeeze through, voles can squeeze through very small holes. So we do a pretty small gauge. And then we build a wooden frame that hardware cloth is attached to on the bottom, and that sits up for us on cinder blocks that kind of holds the base of that. And that allows a taprooted tree to grow down and then hit the air underneath, and it stops growing. It's not in a pot, so it's not going to curl around itself and choke itself. And it's not in a bed where it goes way, way, way down, and then you have to rip the taproot out and it won't regrow at that point. So an air prune bed allows a taproot tree to go down, stop growing, send out really beautiful laterals. And so you have a gorgeous root ball that's very easy to dig up and transplant with a lot of feeder roots. Yeah, we have big ones that we built with offcuts from our cooperatively owned sawmill, which has been really, really fun to do.
Nice.
With big hickory, even though the hickory may not last a long time, it still looks good. But black locust beds. And we also grow stuff that needs a little more protection. Hazelnuts don't need the taproot, but we grow at least some hazelnuts every year in boxes, so we know we'll get them. And then we do others in beds where we're hoping the voles don't find them. And this year, the voles haven't found them, and we have thousands of hazelnuts coming up, and it's very exciting.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Since your farm is forest-based, do you do much inoculation from your own woods? Can you share a little bit about those practices?
Ooh, yeah, I love that. Yeah, we have gone around. We live right at the base of a mountain, of Massanutten Mountain, which is kind of the spine of the Shenandoah Valley. And there are all these hiking and biking trails across it, with beautiful, regrowth from logging, but beautiful woods that are coming back in really diverse ways. So we'll go and dig up or just find little patches where we can take a little bit of soil and mix it into our compost piles and inoculation. We gather leaves from roadsides in our little rural neighborhood, and then from a neighbor who lives across the street up the mountain, oak and hickory and sassafras, tulip poplar, all these leaves, and bring that back as a mulch that we also add into our compost pile. So we're getting the inoculation that way. And then we make compost tea several different times over the summer that we use to water everything in. It's kind of a foliar spray, so that we're coating the plant's body completely and trying to get as many beneficial microbes into the pores of their skin, so to speak. So we use big tanks, a big 250-gallon tote that's cut in half that we use a fish tank aerator to bubble for 24 to 48 hours with compost that we made from what I just described. So it's got all these beneficial, especially fungal organisms. And then stinging nettle, which is like the land seaweed, stinging nettle, comfrey, dandelion, burdock, yarrow that we grow in the nursery. We just go cut that. A couple other herbs I can't remember we have just lying around, put those in bags, aerate, and then feed it with a little molasses to boost the microorganism population, and then we just spray that on everything.
Awesome.
So I think we're getting some amazing stuff that way. I'd love to do some tests, but the look of it changes. Like the greening of the plants is hard to ignore. Whatever the long effects are, I can't speak to that, but there's something happening.
Are you following any specific, for the compost tea, like any specific methodologies that folks could look up, or is it kind of trial and error that you figured out over time?
trial and error stuff that we read in compost books in the past, and at this point we just like fill the bags as much as we can with stuff, and add a little rabbit manure if we have it from a neighbor for nitrogen. But we usually use the compost that we have in bins that we build with wood chips, sawdust, leaves, and horse manure that we get from a neighbor who doesn't spray their fields or feed antibiotics to the horses or anything like that. And so that has some cedar shavings in it, but yeah, no specific thing, but there are people who can offer lots of way better insights on how to make compost tea than me.
Well, and when you're not spraying on a immediate food crop, it really frees you up to experiment quite a bit too.
Totally. I spray it on our annual gardens, not on stuff that we eat immediately, but it's like on the garlic and corn and squash and amaranth and stuff like that. And I think that's doing something.
It's gotta be, man. A day in the life of a plant at your garden sounds pretty dreamy.
It's pretty spa-like for them at that moment.
Okay, specific question. What is your preferred layering method, and what plants do you use it with? Or methods, I'll amend that to say methods.
Yeah. Though that are probably more than I am even aware of, but the ones that we typically do are tip layering, where we take the top of a very flexible plant and bend them down and then pin it into the ground so they grow. We love doing that with blackberries in particular.
What do you like to use for the pin? Do you use like little staples?
Or a rock.
Or a rock.
We're pretty, that's so low tech. I'm not offering that as a suggestion. I'm just saying that's what we do when we're there. But the landscaping pins are awesome to do, especially you got a lot of them. So and the blackberries, sometimes if the soil's loose enough, we can just clip the end where it's a sturdier tip and push it down, and it'll hold themselves in the ground. So that's been fine.
That's what's so great about agroforestry and nursery production, is there is so much stuff where it's like, I don't know, just weigh it down with a rock. It's going to be okay. Like there's so many accessible, approachable, low tech, no tech, low barrier things that you can do. I love it.
These plants want to live. Stool layering is another one where it's like at the base of a plant, often called the stool, and there's multiple shoots. We pile compost or wood chips around them. And we do that with currants. We'll do that with gooseberries. You can do that with hazelnuts. The traditional way of propagating hazelnuts in England for coppicing is tip layering, is what I was just naming. Is like tip the plant over and put a rock, and that's how all these coppiced woodlands are mainly propagated. So it's cloning those varieties, but they're getting just cut and used for their woody gifts. Those are often ways for us to propagate, to spread stuff. We're not doing a lot of layering to propagate plants for the nursery. My sense is we would just need so many, in a good way, but so many plants out in the landscape that we're stooling around or tipping in. And at this point, we've been on this site for 3.5 years. So there are things that are like our plums, or Chickasaw plums, and the so-called American plum are just fruiting this year for the first time. So we're going to be loaded in plums. So things are just starting to come in that we can start propagating and moving around our site. Yeah.
Nice. There's a cricket in the room with me. Can you hear it?
I just now did, and I love it. That's great.
I'm hoping it's not really loud for everybody, because it's real loud for me. And I know I'm not going to find it.
Very musical.
Okay. So these are kind of batched by topic. So moving into species and sourcing, is there any particular underrepresented like species plus human story that you'd like to share?
Thanks for that question. All of them are so good. Some of them that are really fascinating, or that I find so beautiful, like say hazelnut or plum, is that there are stories that are so deeply rooted in the traditions of this continent, and then also their relatives in Europe and parts of Asia that also have deep partnership with humans, and seeing where they're similar, like what they speak to each other. Hazelnut's a sacred plant and Gaelic traditions, in the Isles of so-called Britain, but and Ireland, and hazelnut's also deeply a holy plant in so many indigenous nations on the eastern woodlands, and then in the Pacific Northwest. And so just like learning those stories and seeing them share with one another in a way that isn't colonizing is really beautiful to learn those things. And a way for me to connect with heritage that I feel proud of, or can feel like a sense of gratitude for, that there are things like that, like beautiful partnerships with hazelnut. One that I'm just so excited about is honey locust. It's becoming such, it's been talked about for a long time as an agroforestry crop for a lot of reasons, but one of the ones we're growing, or the one now that we're growing, is called Millwood, which is named for the farm it was found on in, I think, Junaluska, North Carolina. The guy that owned it, David Millwood, they found this gorgeous honey locust, and the pods have like over 30% sugar, and it's a really remarkable plant. But Junaluska is just a few miles from Cherokee, North Carolina, and ecologist named Robert Warren, I think it was sometime in the 90s, early 2000s. This is linked on our website, I can't remember. But he was living in North Carolina teaching, and he was taking hikes, and he was noticing everywhere he was finding honey locust groves, he was within a stone's throw of an archaeological site of a Cherokee village. And he's like, there's something to that. So he got permission from the Eastern Band of Cherokee to do research on tribal lands. He got permission from the National Forest and then other private owners to start kind of transecting those relationships, like making maps. And he found a direct correlation between that. And it's because of the ancestral connection of Cherokee folks to honey locusts that they were breeding for the sugar as a human food from the pods. Breeding them, and that's why these varieties that now have cultivar names are so sugar rich, is not because of the last 50 or 100 years of white guys messing with the plants. It's actually the thousands of years before that point that then people could mess around it. And it doesn't mean that they didn't do something useful, the white guys now, but that's building on ancient work. And honey locust is a great example of that, where they're actually evolved niche is more upland salty ridges of the Midwest. But in Appalachia, they're most commonly found in moist lowlands, and riparian areas. And that's because that's where Cherokee villages were sited. And so it's called a cultivation legacy. Rather than the evolved niche being the main habit, the cultivation legacy is the main habit. And I love that.
See, this is the kind of stuff I love about you, Jonathan.
Just learning what other people did.
Yeah, no, it's great though. It's great. And I love that you've made that such a part of your life's work. And I will just plug for the Silver Run website again. It really is a wealth of information. Like if you're bored and you can't decide what to watch on Netflix some night, give it up and just go to the Silver Run website and start reading the stories and information about the different species they offer, because there's so much good information there.
Oh, thank you. There are a lot of puns too.
I love a pun. How have you accessed your timber farm stock? Do you select wild individuals, or if you found seed sources? And so some of this got answered in the last question.
Yeah, mostly all wild source stuff that we're finding, and some of the things that we find on friends' farms like might be a cultivar. So, and we'll name that, on our website and say where we got these things. Like black locust, we're growing black locust from seed, and like I think we're going to change the source this year, because on a friend's farm, one of the most gorgeous black locusts I've ever seen. I need to figure out fully if they know where this came from, but it is so tall and incredibly straight. Like it looks like what people call the ship mast Hungarian locust looks like, but it's even straighter.
Wow.
Whatever that might be, I don't know fully, so I'm not going to tout stuff I'm not aware of, but it's an amazing tree. So we save tons of seed from that and grow those out and see how they do. So it's often kind of stuff like that. Even for the timber form stuff that we just notice the habit, and especially the locust is not a good example, but others are like, are there other plants nearby that have a similar shape, or is it just this one individual? It's nice to know if there's more of a community habit going on. And now we're trying to access land through friends' places, and Cornelius lives on a nonprofit vegetable farm that has 40 acres, where he's been doing silvopasture with a cooperative goat herd and like creating patches of mulberry and honey locust fodder blocks and then planting a lot of our trees so that now we can grow out the second or third generations of our stuff to be breeding land races, so we can see if these are habits that are getting passed on and then start saving seed from those.
Gotcha. Will you define landrace for folks who aren't?
Landrace is just like a variety that's been locally adapted to a place. Often used to refer to vegetables, but I kind of like applying it to trees too.
And I like the way you're talking about that and the way y'all are approaching it. It makes me think of part of what Sean said in some of the live Q&A on his session about, and he was talking about, he was referencing permaculture specifically, like part of the permaculture principles are, or one of the major principles is, you know, producing little to no waste, you know, closing the loops really. And we were just talking about closing, really the best way to close those loops is in connection and community. And, you know, it really sounds like a lot of what y'all are doing as well. So I love that.
Thanks for that.
Do you have a favorite native fruit tree?
Oh, all of them? I'm bad at that. Yeah, I can name a lot of them. I'll just name two, but I love pawpaws. Even though I think there is some legitimate care and with how much we eat pawpaw, because of some possible kind of precancerous effects that pawpaw can have at quantity.
Interesting. I have not heard that.
Not cancer, neurodegenerative effects that have been linked with Parkinson's. That's in very concentrated doses. So it'd be a ton of pawpaw, but there's not enough research where it's like you can fully dismiss it, and it's not something that fully keeps me from eating them either. I have some links on our website for that. Eliza Greenman, who's going to be on next week, always does a post every year around pawpaw harvest about, like, I'm going to say this again, just, you know, think about how much you're eating.
That's and she'll be on this Thursday, just
this Thursday, not next week.
For folks who are excited about it.
Yeah, amazing knowledge, horticultural history kind of stuff. I love pawpaws partly just because of their habit. I do like eating. We make ice cream, and then we make banana bread, but without the bananas, we use pawpaw. We made a pawpaw mead that was really good. But just these like native orchards underneath walnuts and sycamores that you can tap to make syrup with. It's just a whole orchard. I love pawpaws. And then native plums. I love native plums, how they taste, and then they sucker also. They're spreading through the roots and they just multiply themselves in thickets. And I think thicket is a very fun word, and also a very fun woodland habit.
I love the word thicketing.
I do too. They're thicketing. Yeah, I do too.
All right. And then last question, any species you'd like to see more folks experimenting with, like any hidden gems that could use some representation?
Can you repeat that one more time? Just make sure
anything you'd like to see more folks experimenting with, any hidden gems that could use some representation?
Oh, man.
Or maybe underrated would be another way to think of that.
I'm sure there are so many examples, but I think some of it would be stuff that you get excited about, like in your neck of the woods, like where you are. Is there something you could find to grow out? And like these chestnuts across the street, people are very excited about chestnuts, but these two individuals, nobody else knows about, nobody else is growing them. And they're amazing. They're just huge trees with like their habit is so majestic. And they're very disease resistant, and they have really gorgeous mast on them every year. And it's like, I want to support that tree. I want to, nurture that legacy. So I think stuff like that, it may not be a specific species. It could just be like individuals in your neighborhood or farms that that would be great to do.
Nice. All right, that's it for our pre-prepared questions. So this is the time, folks, to start throwing. We have some in the Q&A, but please feel free to add more. And then while y'all are thinking about those, we'll do another of our quick fires here. So this one has produced some interesting answers so far. Do you have any secret talents?
I have a pretty good ability to drop well-placed movie quote lines in random conversation with people in the voice or in the accent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do. I don't know. That's not a talent, but it's something that I do.
Oh, that's a good talent. That's a good talent. I have to ask this again because we had fun asking Sean this, and it resulted in a whole sidebar of YouTube commentary. If you're going to be reincarnated as an animal, which one? And squirrel's already taken.
Is that what Sean chose?
Yeah,
that
you could
sounds
both
right.
be squirrels. I know it seems so appropriate, right? He's just like gathering nuts and like squirreling them away and planting them.
Very squirrely, in a good way. Man, an animal I want to be reincarnated as.
You could pick a plant too if you know.
Okay, that's fine.
If you feel pressed.
I'd like to be a thicket. No,
that makes sense. Like a whole organism. You could
I'd like to be. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
myceliated underground.
Clonal aspen grove.
Exactly. Pando. Yeah, I'd like to be Pando. I need to think about this just in normal life so I have a better answer. But I feel drawn to beavers.
I am with you there.
Really?
Yeah.
I think beavers are really remarkable creatures and doing some pretty amazing. Thank you, Stasha. The chat's great. Doing beautiful ecological work, and then like they kind of got to figure out how much damage and how much regeneration, which I feel maybe that's too close to what humans are now. But I kind of feel something with the beaver.
They also like. I don't want to take up air in their room. Like trying to like bite my tongue. I'm like trying to host here, but I just love that is a great answer, and I feel you. And they also like build underwater forts. Yeah. They live in both worlds.
I love that's kind of amazing. Which makes me think, what would the experience of being a fungal organism be like? Like just the imaginative practice or like animacy of thinking like mycelium, like that would be a trip.
Yeah.
Whether you're eating the mushroom or not, that sounds amazing.
Okay. What's the last thing you got in trouble for?
The last thing I got in trouble for. Oh man, I don't know how to answer that one. I don't think I'm hiding anything, but just like I think just like tension with my spouse over something we agreed to do, probably, and just like and trying to work that out. I'm sure.
You need to go put away the dishes after this.
But getting in trouble, I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then last one, what do you wish you'd known when you got started in agroforestry?
I mean, there's a couple different things. One is just thinking through land access, for like how crucial, like to go in a major direction like that is like, you're going to plant trees. How do you have protected tenure, whether it's private ownership or not, but just thinking through that is really important. But I think playfully is like how much ancient history there is for agroforestry, but also how much future potential there is. Like it feels very endless in both honoring what's come and also experimenting with the times that we're in, and to not get too stuck in either way. That there are a lot of people who really are very passionate about the preservation of things and only working with proven cultivars and stuff like that, which is beautiful and also limiting and challenging when those cultivars weren't always there and they were experiments at some point. But also that so many shifts of climate and geography that we're in, we need also experiments. And so just that there's a niche for everybody to figure something out, whether it's the growing of stuff or the processing or the distribution or the storytelling. It doesn't have to be the on the ground farming. There's so many other roles in this web.
Gotcha. All right. let's hop into some questions.
Sweet.
So Anonymous says, please go over that fig propagation model again.
Yeah.
Which is a good question. I feel like you hear about like the fig pot method and you hear about all this like really technical stuff, and it sounds like you're just jamming stuff into beds.
That's exactly what we're doing. Yeah. Anonymous, I hope you're still here. We went through a lot of different things to try, and then the most successful thing has been the very easiest, which is
awesome.
In the fall after the leaves drop, when they go dormant, but before everything has fully hardened off, we take cuttings that, you know, I'm holding up a pin. I don't know if you can see. There we go.
Yep.
Often thicker than this, just because that's how figs are. And then, so they're usually like 6 inches, 8 inches long. And then we just stick them deeply into a very mulched nursery bed and make sure the wood chips are almost completely covering, if not fully covering, so that they're insulated. And that's it. Like that's it. They all grow.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
We used to do, when we tried putting them in water and have a fish tank aerator to bubble so they would grow roots, and they all rotted and it smelled horrible. And then we did, we put them in bins of sand and a little bit of like compost, and we kept them in a basement over the winter with plastic covering them to hold the moisture in, and that worked. But then we had to bring them all out and then like transplant each one into a nursery bed for the growing season. So then one year we tried both, and we covered all the ones outside with remay or shade cloth to insulate them a little bit more. And the next year we tried that with ones that weren't covered, and there was no difference in their growth. So just stick them in the ground.
What kind of space, since they're staying in the bed to grow, what kind of spacing?
Like maybe a couple inches apart, sometimes closer. It's pretty dense. Yeah, it's really dense because they're going to die back anyway. So we're doing bare root and we're shipping, and the heights of trees are really mattering for cost. But it doesn't matter with fig because they die back, and so we can prune them way back. So if they're really dense and they don't get as tall, it doesn't matter because the root systems are unbelievable.
Okay.
And one year, the roots of some of these have grown out of the beds into other beds nearby, and we have to just prune them back.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. How did you start sourcing these awesome seeds around your neighborhood? Just making friends, Craigslist, etc.?
Making friends. Some of this started because our nursery kind of suckered off of this group called Vine and Fig that Emilie mentioned earlier that I helped start, and I was a gardening with and a mediator with. So we had this really beautiful, and it's still there, a beautiful kind of urban farm and community center supporting friends who need safe housing after living on the streets or coming from war-torn countries seeking refuge. And we were doing stream restoration along an urban stream. We planted forest gardens. We had market gardens, and so we were bringing in all these varieties of stuff. And so as we were starting the nursery, we had all this stuff to start playing around with. Things that came from Edible Landscaping, which is a big nursery on the East Coast in Afton, Virginia, stuff that neighbors had offered, things that some of the other folks had been working with. And so we had this, and then things growing along the stream bank that we used, mulberries and different things we could save. So that was some of it. Is like we just started with what we already had access to, and then propagating those to get to know those better. And then as we started connecting with other nurseries or growers, folks like Sean, and others, like getting other varieties. I think our first false indigo, our first river locust, came from Edible Acres. And then we've been saving seed and growing out the ones that work well here, and then coppicing the other ones. And so, yeah, it just like starting with what we had access to and where we were, and then things we got excited about because we were walking around university campuses in the area, knowing like sometimes there's landscaping on these universities or churches or schools with all this kind of amazing edible stuff that people don't pay any attention to. And so the hazelnuts, like a lot of the hazelnuts we grow come from the university where I did my graduate degree in Harrisonburg. And so I've known this grove of hazelnuts for years, and we've been growing them out and finally found that they're from Oregon State University's first round of breeding for Eastern filbert blight resistance. So some of them don't even have names, but they're expressing mostly native genetics, even though they're a cross. So we just grow those out from seed because they're all very vigorous and doing really well without much effort.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Here's a good nuts and bolts question. Can you heal into fresh wood chips, or do they need to be composted?
I don't know exactly, but because I haven't tried, I've usually done more decomposed stuff just because it forms around the roots better. And then I wonder with fresh wood chips, especially if there's much leaf in it, what the like heat of it would be, the decomposition rate. So I'd be pretty hesitant to use fresh. Let it season for a little while.
Yeah. All right. Bob Gesner is asking, how do you evaluate / weigh the potential cost benefits of non-native species?
Well, I would say a lot, like what we grow in the nursery, most of the non-native stuff is stuff I think that has learned pretty good boundaries. They don't take over.
Non-native, non-aggressive.
Yeah, they're a little gentler, and they play well with others. Figs are not taking over anybody in this climate. And then some of it's up to the people. Like people are buying black locust from us, and we ship those to places where black locust isn't native, and we note their habit. And we could take a different approach, but we just kind of leave it up to that person, and that may be, there could be issues with that I feel I'm open to kind of rethinking through some of that. And I'd love to keep most things local or bioregional and eastern woodland focused anyway. So we're kind of building towards that, where we would do very little shipping to far distances. But I think I would say overall, I would especially for restoration projects and even thinking about agroforestry, I would favor a lot of native plants. Like people have partnered with these plants for a really long time, and they're really amazing, and they support way more life, local life, than a lot of the non-native plants do. Just like more species feed from them in really beautiful ways. But there is a role for some of these non-natives in some of the agricultural systems. I think figs being one of those examples that could be really great. I love autumn olive as a taste, and but I'm not eager to plant out a ton more. The autumn olive that's here, I think there are ways to partner with that plant to start teaching some healthy boundaries, but there are other native nitrogen fixers that don't have the same habit that I would favor first. Yeah.
Nice. And since it looks like we're going to have time, I'm going to insert a question here. You spoke earlier about, community or collective nursery collectives or cooperatives and, community nurseries. I don't know if you want to just take a minute to talk about, the kind of importance of having a network of regional nurseries that are offering bioregional stock. And I don't know if you want to talk about that for a minute, but I think that would be great.
Yeah, I think we can't do it alone, and there are a lot of people doing stuff that should just be linked up and networked, and that we need redundancy. We need more people doing the same things, but they could scale up in a really unique way in partnership, where it doesn't have to only be a vertical integrated massive scaling up. It can be scaling up by scaling deep and scaling wide through a kind of myceliated model. Like that. So that's stuff that we're kind of playing around with. We've done a little bit of that with people, just aggregating plants from multiple nurseries for big restoration or agroforestry projects. I think is a real possibility and a really beautiful, co-op model. But then we're also just you can do that bioregionally, places that are defined by the shape of land and the flow of water and the cultural relationships to that place as a bioregion. To be working with plants that just do really well there. And there's enough shared similarities in some of the places along what we call the East Coast that there can be a lot of crossing over and sharing. But I think making these beautifully rich hubs that are sort of like seed banks or arboretums just feels like a vision that holds a lot of possibility to me, so that people don't have to only just get huge, but they also don't have to just lone wolf everything themselves either. There can be some cooperation. There are great models for that.
Yeah, especially in, I'll say, younger farm operations, that lone wolf impetus to do everything oneself is Yeah. It's so prevalent and is so unnecessary.
And not what most of human history has looked like.
Yeah. Not how we're designed.
No.
Carolina Farm Stewardship Association asks, is the false indigo you like Baptisia australis or Amorpha fruticosa?
Good question. The common names get confusing when they share the same one. The image that I showed and the one I've been talking about is Amorpha fruticosa. That's called false indigo bush. And we found a common name, river locust, in a journal about them. And we love that name. So we just use that one a lot.
Yeah.
But Amorpha fruticosa, that's a native, a little bit further west of where I am, but also to here, but a native shrub that grows 8 to 10 feet tall, beautiful conical purple flowers and a nitrogen fixer. The Baptisia is a smaller, very fleshy, herbaceous perennial that is also native, and then has seed pods that grow out that turn into look like little rattles, and the seeds shake in them and they make a noise. But they're both native nitrogen fixers that are sometimes called false indigo. And we grow both of them.
Okay, excellent. All right, Leah Justice, hey Leah, asks, any tips for cohabitating painlessly with chestnuts? Could you harvest in sheets like they do olives to keep the spike balls out of human and pets' lawns? We have a hate-love relationship with them here. I chatted with her about this before, and I think they sort of inherited a mature chestnut really close to their home.
Oh man, that's challenging. I think something about the prickly nature of chestnut is teaching us to walk carefully. So maybe pay attention to that, which I'm sure you're doing. That's challenging when it's right around your house, but I think we have one that's in our yard, but it's further away from the door, and we're not walking around them all the time. But we use gloves, and we wear boots, and we kick the burrs, and we pick the nuts, or we use a nut wizard. It's a tool for rolling on the ground, and there are these tines that stretch and pick up the nuts. That's a great way to harvest, and then we'll rake all the burrs into piles so that they're congregated, and that way we can see if there are nuts underneath that we missed. But then we're also getting all the burrs into just distinct piles and not just spread out everywhere. And that's one of the first things we do when we harvest, actually, is rake into piles and then sort through. So that might be a way to negotiate that relationship with chestnut a little bit.
Excellent. Steve Diamond in New Hampshire. 2 acres is the standard suburban lot. What, if any, sort of accessible yet systematic adjustment to land management are you hoping to inspire with your work?
I don't know about specific, because I think models need to look different, in different places. And so I'm hesitant to speak about things that we're doing and then tell people like, and you could try this, or you could do this. That's just not how I approach, and not how Cornelius and I talk about what we do. But I think you're right about that 2-acre lot, and like what an amazing opportunity for some other possibilities. And I think some of what we're interested in is land trust models, where land is decommodified by being owned cooperatively and collectively, so that it can't ever be bought or sold again, as an owned individually, but owned as a community. And that has a lot of flexibility in how it can be done, but it includes leases. And so I could imagine, like, what would a suburban block look like that was actually a land trust, where all the land underneath the suburb was owned collectively, so it wouldn't affect the real estate values, but people can lease the kind of exclusive access for that 2 acres to do different things with, or choose to like let the community use it because they're too busy or have other things going on and that's not their passion to use the land. So I'm not trying to spill out a model here, but there are tons of models for land trusts and housing co-ops and different ways to organize land ownership that is so different than what the US specifically looks like, which is pretty recent in human history. There are many other models for land ownership, and there are great sources for that, but one that we've offered is on our website. We have a whole tab called Library, and under there we have a document about land trusts that we put together, something that is helping us think through possibilities, but also something that maybe other people would find useful. Because we need major land reform in the US. I'll just say that very explicitly. There's major redistribution that needs to happen, and also reform of different models to make land more accessible, cheaper, and more just, and who has access to it. So land reform movements around the world would be worth studying and learning from.
And Rowan Perry asks, do you host any regular gatherings for the nursery for those like me who want to connect more with folk school, nuttery, and land trust organizing?
We don't right now. Good to hear your name on here, Rowan. We don't right now. Not something regular, but just people reaching out and saying, hey, I'd love to come hang out is often how we've done things when we have to make it work. But often it's like when we're working on projects and would love support cider pressing, you know, and the fall, just fun things, kind of festival things that we're doing too. But we have talked about having like a quarterly or like seasonal like agroforestry gathering where people can come hang out and do things. We just haven't made that happen yet. But we will put things on the folk school tab if we have workshops or events coming up so that people can check that.
And you guys have a newsletter sign up, right?
We have a newsletter. It's on every page of our website at the bottom. I'm due to write one. And then we have an Instagram and a Facebook page that we do occasional posts on as well. So feel free to check that out.
Awesome. And that brings us to the end of the questions. We're actually running on time, which is great. So our final question is, what's next? What's up in the future for Silver Run? Anything we should stay tuned for? Or for you?
We might be hosting, we're still working on this, we might be hosting a workshop maybe in July on kind of radical economics, like co-ops and economic structures that we'd love to bring people into. There's a free version of the course we'd be hosting offered through the New Economy Coalition called Economics for Emancipation. Stasha, if you Google that, Economics for Emancipation, there's a 7-part module that's free. That's really amazing stuff. So we'd be hosting an in-person version of that potentially. We're working on hopefully some big partnerships on growing out some of these plants at scale for major redistribution and regeneration. We just got back last night actually from going down to Alabama, partnering with a Muskogee Eco Village, a Creek or Muskogee-led project that's reclaimed over 2,000 acres of ancestral land and took a bunch of trees, and talking about partnership for the fall of some major restoration using native agroforestry crops. So figuring out ways to scale up well to support those kinds of projects. And then I'm working with, among other people, Steve and Elizabeth Gabriel at Wellspring Forest Farm, and some folks through Interlace Commons on a grant through SARE, Northeast SARE, to scale up agroforestry in the Northeast through popular education and community organizing for starting these nurseries and thinking about bottlenecks of plant propagation with people. So that'll be really fun.
Awesome. Any last words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with before we wrap up?
Trying to figure out what a tree would say here. Whatever a tree would say, but they all wouldn't say the same thing. So that's fine. We'll just leave it at that. What a tree. What they might bark.
Thanks everybody for being here this evening. Thank you so much to Jonathan. Thank you for donating your time. Speaking of donations, if anyone would like to drop a donation into the ASD bucket to help keep all of this excellent programming free, Stesh, if you'll throw the link in the chat, that is something that you can do very easily. And if she can't find the link right now, or if she stepped away, you can also just do it at the same website where you got your tickets. There it is. And don't forget, we've got 2 more. So hopefully we'll see you Thursday, and hopefully we'll see you a week from today. And yeah, I'm just reading some of the the chat commentary. Leah says, walking softly, thanks, about her chestnut. Steve Diamond's noticing that just like Sean's, your website is totally sold out, so you must be doing good work. Casey says, thank you, great stuff. Katie says, very inspiring work. Thanks for sharing. So all good stuff. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. We appreciate you all. And, you know, until then,
bye. Thanks,
what a tree would say.
Whatever a tree would say.
It would bark.
It
right?
would totally bark.
It would totally bark. All right. We'll leave it there. Good night, everybody.